Hello, everybody. Happy Thursday. Happy first day of the May class schedule where we're doing classes live on Thursday nights now instead of Saturday. The time also changed from 6 to 6:30. So if any of you have been hanging out, waiting for 30 minutes, wondering where the heck I was, it is 6:30 now, just because on a weekday nights, I figure people need that extra time to get home from work, let out the dogs, or, pregame or whatever you need to do. So Thursday nights from now on in the summertime is when the classes will be. They'll be 6:30 to 8-ish. I always try and cap it at about an hour and a half, but it depends on how excited I get about the subject. Sometimes I get a little bit later, or if I speed taste because I am so excited, then sometimes I end earlier. So around that time frame, but again, you can always watch at your own convenience. If you're tuned in live, I'd love to hear where you are coming from, who you are. My parents are here, so I know that they are here, but in the chat room, by the way, everyone has said, Tawana has asked me to let everyone know that she will not be tuned in live for May. She will miss you all greatly. She'll have to watch the recordings because Thursday nights don't work for her in May, but we'll hopefully get everyone together again in June. So some mom and some pop here coming in. If you are tuned in and can't see this option for the chat room, make sure you are signed in. So in the upper right-hand corner, if it just says a profile picture, it says sign in underneath. That means you need to sign in. You need to do that in order to use the chat room feature. If you don't want to use the chat room feature and don't want to tune in, but you do want to comment at all, you can always text or email me. You should all have my contact information. You can Instagram message me or Facebook message me. I'll keep those things up nearby so that if you do need to reach out but can't use the chat room, then that's available as well. Hi, Akila. Great to see you today. It was wonderful to meet you. Looking forward to tasting lots more wines in the future with you and everybody too. Hi, Kira and Rob. Great to see y'all as well, tuning in from California. What are y'all drinking out there in California? Please do tell. Make us jealous. And let's see. So we're going to start off with the white wine, if that wasn't obvious, although every now and then I switch it up. So, hey, Dominica, coming from Williamsburg. Great to see you. We're going to start off with this wine right here. It is Garcia Revalo, or Garcia Revalo. So the accent mark is on the E right here, so that's the emphasis is on that syllable. So Garcia instead of Garcia Revalo is how that would be like normally in Spanish. So Garcia Revalo, and it's their finca Tres Olmos. So the farm of the three leaves, basically. They're Verdejo. So we're going to start off with this one. I'm very excited. Go ahead and pour yourself a big old glass of that if you like. And then you can go ahead and start tasting away for this wine while I kind of give a brief overview of what old vines means, why it's important, and if it makes a difference or what difference it does make in the wines. And some things to not pay attention to in terms of the marketing of old vines. So I'm going to start off by saying cheers, first of all. That is so tasty. Not even focusing on it. That is super delightful wine. Very excited to actually get into it in a little bit. So I want to start off by saying what old vines doesn't mean. And here's the first thing. Old vines doesn't mean, okay, sorry, technological issues here. Perfect, thanks. Good thing I have some videographer help around here. Her name is Sam Mom. And, happy Mother's Day. Here, let me let everyone say hello to Sam Mom and Sam Pop. There they are. I hope everyone got the email about the Mother's Day special that I was doing. She got to pick out her own six-pack, and I talked about different lessons that you learn about mothering. Not exactly how to be a mother or anything like that, but lessons you learn during mothering. So 6 delicious wines, and we had fun with that. So hopefully I get to drink them all with her one night. Yeah. All right. So anyways, back to old vines and what not to pay attention to first of all. So don't pay attention to anyone that says old vines and on the label, and just by matter of the fact that it says old vines, don't think that that means the wine is going to be necessarily better. So there is no legal definition to old vines. Not a single country has a actual definition for old vines or actual classification for old wines. So it could be anything. So someone could market their old vines because they are 3 years old. I don't think many people would do that, but there's no regulations or stipulations on it at all. So old vines does not mean a specific age of the vine itself. It could be anything. There are some collective of growers who have decided that they themselves are going to self-regulate and say that we are not going to put old vines on our wine labels unless they're this age, minimum, or an average of this age in the vineyards. There are some people who are doing that, but there's no government entities in any of these countries actually who are putting a stipulation on the age of the vine to qualify something as old vines. So there is some marketing gimmicks here going on, right? Anytime there's not a specific definition on a term, anyone can use it. Just like in California, the term reserve doesn't actually mean anything. Reserva means a lot in terms of French, Spanish, Italian wines, and some other wine regions. But in terms of California wine, it means nothing. So someone could make their flagship wine or the wine that they make the most of, their like bread and butter wine, and call it reserve, not because it's any better than anything else, but it just makes it seem fancier. So old vines is kind of like that. So you get a lot of duds that are labeled as old vines, but then there's some real gems in there. So there are some marketing inconsistencies with the term old vines. Number two, one of the things that is a little bit dangerous about old vines is that as vines age, just like humans, we become more disease prone. So sometimes old vines are going to actually produce worse wine than their younger versions, their younger counterparts. And it's just because as the vines get older, they get more susceptible to things like phylloxera, downy mildew, tree rot. Any of these things can really cause problems with the quality of the fruit that those older vines are producing. So old vines doesn't mean anything, first of all, technically speaking, and sometimes old vines produce worse grapes than their younger counterparts. So what's the benefit here? Well, one benefit, which also comes with sometimes a downside as well, is the lower yield in which these vines are producing their grapes. So a vine is growing, it has all their clusters, and by the way, this is probably going to be the last week that I use just strict YouTube Live. I'm going to go to a new platform that will go on YouTube Live that'll allow me to share photos and maps and such. So that'll be really exciting. But for now, just imagine I am a vine and I am growing in all of these shoots. And each cane, when in my younger years, I'm going to be producing, 8 clusters per cane or per shoot. As I get older, that decreases and decreases and decreases, generally speaking. So lower quantity of grapes usually will indicate a higher concentration level of those grapes that they are produced. So higher concentration, that's a good thing. More flavor, right? Deeper flavors, more concentrated flavors, more depth to those flavors. Sometimes though, lower yield also means they just make less wine, right? So then the price can sometimes go up. And we're talking certain areas too, because in California, where you have old vine Zinfandel planted all throughout California, there's over 50,000 acres of old vine Zinfandel, that grape alone, and I'm talking like over 75 years planted all throughout California. And so you can get an old vine Zinfandel for $8 in the grocery store. So look, old vines doesn't necessarily mean more expensive, but in some of these old vine vineyards that are extremely old, then yes, the yield is going to go down, so the price will go up on some of these wines, some of them. But overall, the lower yield means more concentration of flavoring. And fourth, before we go on to all of the positives, I want to talk about younger isn't always a bad thing, right? So it doesn't mean that if old vines are good or producing really delicious grapes, and that means young vines aren't going to be as delicious or aren't going to be as concentrated. They're not going to be as flavorful. And while there are some differences, it doesn't mean young wines are bad. So if you ever see a bottle, it's actually kind of rare that someone will market their wine as young wines or young vines. Don't think that it's necessarily a bad thing. So in the big judgment of Paris, if you remember, if you've ever seen the movie Bottle Shock or just know a little bit about your wine history, there was a big competition, a tasting competition in Paris. It was in the 70s, and there was this wine critic who goes to California, and basically to prove that these Californians need to stay in their lane is going to bring some of the California wine to Paris to compete against some of these top producers of the best wines in the entire world in this blind tasting. And California wine actually won out in several of those components. Well, Chateau Montelena, their Chardonnay, was their like the epic Chardonnay that won. If you've seen the movie, that's kind of what it's all about. Well, Stag's Leap Cabernet Sauvignon from Napa Valley, Stag's Leap District. Stag's Leap, their Cabernet vines that they used to make the wine that won the entire competition for red wine, those vines were only 7 years old. So don't think that wines cannot create world-class wines at a young age. Older vines create something unique and different, and that's what we're here to talk about. But don't down the youngins. So that's what I'm going to say about like why it doesn't matter. And now we're going to talk about why it does matter. All right, so we talked about lower yield. It's going to mean more concentration of those flavors. So if I'm a vine, I am trying to procreate to make sure my seed is spread throughout the earth so my genes live on as I die. That's if I'm a vine, definitely not as a human. I have no children. But a vine thinks that. And so they're trying to create grapes that are super tasty so that it attracts the birds. So the birds eat the grape and takes the seed and naturally spreads it all around. So that's the idea of a vine. So as it gets older, it kind of has like less and less motivation to produce more children or more possibilities. And so it's just going to produce a few. But almost about the same amount of energy goes into producing 3 clusters instead of 8. So you have that intense concentration of all of those aspects, the flavor and the concentration, because they're still trying to attract the birds. They just don't have time or energy to produce 8 clusters, maybe only 3 or 5. So that's what the concentration is all about. The second reason why it's better, so 1, more concentration because of lower yield. Number 2, the grapes tend to be more balanced. And we don't know why this is exactly. So before you ask, well, what's the science behind that? We don't know. There's so much about this aspect that we actually just have no idea the science behind it. It's really fascinating. So in grapes, you have acidity, you have acid compounds or chemical compounds. Specifically, about 90% of the acid compounds are malic acid and tartaric acid. Those are the 2 primary ones. You have a little bit of citric acid and some other acid compounds, but that's about 10% total. 90% of that is just tartaric acid and malic acid. Well, it needs to be a specific ratio to kind of create the best profile, the best tasting profile for the grape itself. So tartaric acid is actually 3 times as strong in terms of flavor-wise as malic acid. So say you have, 1 tangerine. If you have 1 lemon, you need 3 tangerines to make up the same amount of acidity, flavor profile-wise, in whatever juice you make from that. Same thing with malic acid and tartaric acid. So if the ratio is off, which it is usually in younger wines, their wines are going to seem like kind of off balance in terms of their acidity. So the acids are more balanced. The sugars are also more balanced in the way that they ripen on time with everything else. So you have a great growing season. And so as soon as the bud breaks and the grape clusters start to form, from then until harvest is the whole growing season. You want everything to be ripe at the same time. So acids develop first, and then you've got your tannins and your other phenolics develop, the bitter components in wine, and lastly, your sugars are going to develop. Well, the idea is that everything develops so that when you harvest it, you have the perfect balance of all things, from the sugars to the acids to the phenolics. Everything needs to be ripe at the same exact kind of pivotal moment where everything is just coming together and magic happens. If everything's ripe and like you need to pick these grapes now because the grapes are going to start rotting on the vine, but the tannins really haven't fully ripened, or the sugars are kind of way off kilter, the acids are going downhill, then everything just kind of gets off kilter in your wine. So the older the vines are, the more everything starts to just kind of come together at the right moment at the same time. And again, we don't know why this is, but it happens, and all the farmers and wine growers, or vignerons, people who actually not make the wine in the cellar, but make the wine in the vineyard, I call them wine growers, and then they can attest to the fact that older vines, you just have this, like, you don't have to concentrate as hard on picking to a certain ripeness level of something, but you're going to sacrifice something else along the way. So it's just kind of that perfect balance of all three of those things. So more concentration, better balance of acids, sugars, and phenolics, or tannins. The third reason, and this is probably, I guess, one of the most, I guess everyone knows more concentration because lower yield. And then these other things start to become less and less known. But I think probably one of the most important things is the root depth. So as a vine, my source of life is the roots themselves. They are going to absorb water. Water is holding water-dissolved, water-soluble nutrients that I need to survive and grow. If I don't get those nutrients, if it's just water, that's not good. If it's just nutrients, but without the water, I can't actually absorb the nutrients. So I need both. It's that perfect balance. And the roots themselves are what's going to absorb those and bring them up through the trunk and make the whole vine what it needs to survive. It's the plumbing, and you have to have that plumbing intact. Well, in the first 5 to 10 years, you actually have the vast majority, about 50% of any root structure will develop in the first 5 to 10 years. So you think like, well, then what does it matter if it's old vines if 50% of all of those roots are ever going to develop in the first 5 to 10 years? And here's why. You get the majority of the framework. The rest of the time is developing these tiny little hairs, these root hairs in the micro roots is what I would call them, to better access the tiny little pockets that porosity in the soil will kind of absorb and hold these pockets of water and nutrients. So big roots can't really access those. You need the smaller roots to get in there. And that's what develops from 15 years on, is lots and lots of smaller roots that will go through all these little tiny cracks in the soil to get the best option for those. Remember that vines need to struggle if they're going to make really high quality grapes. And so if you have too much water, too much nutrients, the vine doesn't struggle enough, and so the grapes themselves have no character whatsoever. But they struggle too much, and then they're fighting too hard to survive to make really high quality grapes. So there's a very fine balance, and older vines have that better system in place. So year of droughts, they're going to be more set up. Their system is in place. They've got access to the goods. If it's too much rain, if it's too little nutrients, they've got all of the access to it so that they can kind of mitigate the weather changes, the climatic changes from vintage to vintage, to make sure that they are always making really stable wines in every single vintage. Finally, what develops in the roots throughout time and continues to develop throughout time, and my mom might need to help me with the pronunciation of this, but mycorrhizal fungi, they live right underneath the root skins themselves, within the roots, but this is fungus that lives right within the roots themselves. It's not a part of the plant. It's a unique organism, but it lives underneath the root skins, and it sends out its own tiny little root hairs called hyphae. Is that how that's pronounced? Hyphae? Okay. So these hyphae are these tiny little hairs that come out that look almost just, I mean, under a microscope, it would look similar to these tiny little root hairs of the vine itself, but it's coming from the fungi itself. And this fungi has a unique ability to use enzymes, its own enzymes, to process certain micronutrients in the soil that the root hair cannot access, especially phosphorus, which is usually tied up in the iron in soils. So only the enzyme of this fungi can really help break down the phosphorus and absorb that. Otherwise, the root can't access it, can't really get to it. It's there, but it's like an ATM without your ATM card. You can't get any money out. So the fungi kind of act as the ATM card to help bring in the thing that the root actually needs. And then the vine sees that, oh, thanks for bringing us some more phosphorus and all of these other things, but especially phosphorus. We're going to reward you with the thing that you want. It's this symbiotic relationship that the fungi live off of the rewards that the root sends to it. And the rewards are thanking them for bringing in these nutrients that otherwise would not be available to the vine. So this system of fungi develops over time. So younger vines don't have it. It really only happens about 10 years and on in a vine. So that leads us to the point. What is considered, I know we don't have a legal definition, but what is generally considered old for an old vine? And here's where it gets really depressing, y'all. All right, so we've talked about how 7 years old were the vines that Stags Leap District had when they won the Judgment of Paris tasting. So at about 3 years, a vine will start producing fruit, but it's usually those fruit clusters are pruned off. So at about 5 years, it is producing harvestable fruit. And remember, vines aren't planted from the seeds themselves. Generally speaking, in vineyards, they're vine clippings tended in a nursery, and then those clippings are brought into the vineyard. So about 3 years old, they're producing fruit. About 5 years old, it's finally harvestable. And it reaches adulthood, so to say, at 7 years old. So 7 to 10, it starts getting to that kind of maturity stage, and it's starting to learn how to be a profitable member of society, the vineyard. And technically, old vines could be considered old at about 25 years old. So we're all quite past, I don't know about all of us, but I'm certainly past that prime there. But generally speaking, 35 years is kind of like the industry norm. But most people, if you're going to talk to higher end producers, they wouldn't consider their old vines old until 50. So somewhere between 25 to 50 is perfectly acceptable to start calling your vines old vines. And it kind of depends on the region and the region's history, what they refer to as old. So for instance, in Oregon and Washington State, they've really only got their start in the late 70s versus California started way earlier. They had about 25 years more history for premium winemaking. So post-prohibition, that's when it kind of kicked off in California, but Oregon and Washington were a little bit delayed. So what would be considered old vines in Washington might not be considered old vines in California. Same thing in any other newer wine region. You have a little bit lower threshold for what's considered old. So at about 70 years old, that's called a survivor vine. And kind of Australia coined this because they have some of the oldest vines in the world, which we'll taste next. I promise I haven't forgot about the wines we're actually tasting. I just want to get the information out of the way soon. So a survivor wine would be something that is about 70 years old and older. So they have survived, they have made it, they are in retirement age. It doesn't mean they stop producing grapes, thank God, because we're going to taste all of these wines are over 70 years old, or vines are over 70 years old. And then if it's over 100 years old, it's called a centurion vine. So it's made it through the century. And then finally, an ancestor vine would be over 125 years old. Now, again, these are terms that kind of Australia has coined, but there's no legal definition, so anyone can kind of use this. It's not like calling something Rioja when it's not from Rioja. So very interchangeable, flexible terms, but now you kind of understand what a little bit of them mean. So where are the oldest vines in the world? And then we will get to the tasting. The oldest living vine that we know of that's actually dated is actually in England. It's in some like manor, some like it's got a gate around it, and it's going around a building. It was planted in the late 1760s. And it's still producing grapes, but they're not commercially made into wine. And so just very different structure, but 1760s, and this vine is still around. And oddly enough, this has a history of actually producing higher yields later in its life than earlier. So in the 2000s, it was producing some record yields in terms of all the grapes that were actually harvested that year than it had in previous years, in the previous 100 years. So whether that's to do with climate or anything else, or maybe the fairy godmothers of the vineyards were blessing that vine that year, I'm not sure, but we don't really know. And then the actual oldest commercially producing grapevines, meaning the vines that are producing grapes that are commercially viable to make into quality wine, are actually in Barossa, Australia. So a lot of those were planted in the 1840s, the late 1840s. But throughout Italy, we're going to go on to Italy now. We'll try grapes planted in the 1870s. And so plenty of these vines right here are actually ancestor vines that we will be tasting from, especially including this Verdejo from Rueda, Spain. It is about 130-year-old vines. They're kind of known for their old vine Verdejo. And you think, oh my word, this is going to be very expensive wine because it's 130-year-old vines they're making this from. It ain't. It's I forget what the tag says in there, but it's around like $20 to $25. So epic quality for this wine. Lias, if you see on the label right here, so it's Garcia Revalo, Figa Tres Olmos, Verdejo Lias, which means lees. So the yeast that is used in the fermentation. If the wine is aged, the actual juice is aged on the lees or yeast, then it's going to produce a kind of a richer, rounder texture. And this wine was, I think, for about 11 months. Don't quote me on that one. So tell me what you're thinking now. Finally, getting into the tasty notes of these wines. Plus, mine was way too cold, so I needed it to warm up in time to get my nose in there. But oh my word, it's such a beautiful aromatic. Tell me what you are smelling and tasting in this wine, though. And if there's anything I need to clarify from the beginning part of that diatribe, let me know. Kira, love the movie Bottle Shock. Yes, it's one of the few wine movies that I could keep watching. It doesn't aggravate me. Unlike, and everyone knows I hate the movie Sideways, but that movie is so frustrating. So, and yes, interesting on the meaning of reserve, or I guess lack thereof, for California specifically. The rest of the world is very technical in their terms of what reserve means. But all right, Keila says, how do they track the ages of the vines? Do they label them? Great question. A lot of it is oral history, actually. So people have been passing their vineyards on from generation to generation. And it's kind of like, well, that whole vineyard was planted this year because that's the year that, that we were finally allowed to plant grapes again because Prohibition was over, or that's the year that my grandfather died, or something. There's a lot of just oral history in this because they weren't tracking it to make these premium quality wines. In fact, Zinfandel these old vine Zinfandels has some of America's oldest vines. The Zinfandel grapes were actually grown as table grapes. They weren't actually grown originally to make into wine. And some of those original grape varieties, grape vines were planted to make table grapes, not wine. So people weren't tracking this intellectually as they are now. So great question on that. A lot of it is just oral history. Sunpop says, on the nose I get green apples, slate, ozone after a spring thunderstorm, that minerality, that water evaporating on the sidewalk, on the asphalt, and you kind of get that sidewalk in the air. So I like it. And apple blossom. I love that. Great call. You're on it today, Papa. Akila said, I have a friend named Akili, and this is going to be tricky. I will remember that. I smell pear, green apple, and some floral notes. Love these calls. And Verdejo is all of these things. Verdejo is Chardonnay meets Chenin Blanc meets Sauvignon Blanc meets Pinot Grigio. All four of those grapes kind of come together. You have the citrus notes of the Sauvignon Blanc. You have this like green apple note of the Pinot Grigio. You have these really like mineral notes of Chenin Blanc, and you have these apple and pear notes of the Chardonnay. So all of these things are coming together. And brake fluid, just kidding. All right, thanks for putting the just kidding on there. Really digging this. It smells to me a little bit like biscuits, or a little bit like something baked goods, and that's the extra yeast or lees aging on the wine. Unbelievable. So really delightful wine, especially today. This is like the perfect springtime white wine, I think, because it's not just crisp and fruity, which is what I want in the summertime when it's hot and I need something really refreshing, but it doesn't weigh you down either. It's that perfect like middle ground white wine. I think this might be one of my new favorite white wines that I've had recently. So
it's a buttery component.
And a buttery component too, some mom says. And absolutely, that is coming from that richer, rounder texture that lees aging does to wine. It gives it this softer, rounder body. Yeah, absolutely. It's a good thing. Softer, rounder bodies. I like that. Some pop says the palate is almost the same as the nose, but without the blossoms. You mean you don't taste the floral? Yeah. There's a little bit of like this pineapple-y kind of note to it, like pineapple core thing, almost like the bitter, steely part of a pineapple. But I don't get necessarily like, it's not a floral white wine on the palate. It doesn't taste like you're drinking perfume. So, all right, well, let's get into the reds now. Really excited to taste these reds. So, and the reds are an interesting question. Why do some vines age better than others? And we don't really know. It is quite interesting. So, by the way, the first red wine that we are going to pour is Tim Smith. This is his Bugalugs Grenache from Barossa, Australia, 2020 vintage. Old vine, Barossa Grenache. So there is no finding or filtration on this wine. So if you get some sediment in it, don't worry. There's not dirt in the wine. It even looks super cloudy. If you give it some good swirls, it almost looks like my glass is really dirty or something like that. It's not. It's just very, very cloudy, unfiltered wine. So while y'all get your nose in there, smell away, taste away. Don't need to wait for anything. I want to talk to you about why some vines age better than others. And so we've all heard of old vine Zinfandel, very, very classic. Last couple classes, we've tasted some older vine Carignan. We tasted 2 older vine Carignans from Lioka in California when we did that Meet the Maker class in February. And in March, we did a Meet the Maker class with the guy from the Languedoc area, Chateau Maris, when we talked about biodynamics. And he did a very old vine Carignan as well, too. So Zinfandel, Carignan, Alianaco, and Grenache are all 4 very, very classic grape types or grape varieties that age very well. Gamay doesn't age very well. So if you ever see Vieux Vin, which is the French term for old vines, on a bottle of Beaujolais that is 100% Gamay, then you know that that's probably actually only about 25 to 35 years old. They don't really last much past 50. And then the vine just kind of stops producing fruit, becomes way too disease prone. You get a diminishing rate of returns in terms of the fruit that you're getting. So then the vines are ripped up and more little shoots are planted. So certain grapes don't age as well than others, and that just comes down to the genetic profile of the actual vine itself. So we don't really understand it all. At least I don't understand it all. If there's people who do, then I need to sit in on some lectures that they are teaching so that I can pass that information along to you. But for whatever reason, Grenache ages very well. Carignan ages very well. I didn't want to do an old vine Carignan for this class though, because we've just done like 3 in the last couple of months. Alianaco ages really well, which we'll do next, and Zinfandel ages really well. Those vines withstand age, and they are less disease prone as they get older. So they don't just trap all of these diseases and get old. So these old vines Grenache in Barossa specifically are some of, remember, the oldest vines in the whole world. In the area of Barossa, you have vines that were planted in the 1840s. The oldest vine in the entire world that we were talking about from Barossa is actually Shiraz grape. So Syrah, Shiraz, same grape, planted in 1847. But throughout the later part of the 40s, you have, a lot of other vines kind of planted in similar years, and some of them being Grenache. Now, these grapes were planted in about, these vines were planted in about 1910, 1911. It's a collection of multiple different vineyards, so that's the average kind of planting time. So we're looking at 110-year-old vines for this. So we've reached the centurion state without being ancestor vine status. But Tim Smith makes really epic Mataro or Mourvedre, same grape, if you've heard of it, Mataro or Mourvedre, and Grenache and some Syrah as well. I love Barossa Grenache because there's just this wild quality to it. I don't really know what it is. They just taste different than Grenache grown in southern France in the Rhone Valley. Even though, this is not blended with anything, it's 100% Grenache. And Grenache in southern Rhone might be blended often with other grape varieties. When I have had 100% Grenache in southern France, it's just not quite the same, but similar, versus Grenache or Garnacha from Spain, wildly different, made to be super extracted. Some of that's just the style in which the winemakers are making their wine. But one of the reasons why it might taste quite different is because Phylloxera has not made it to Barossa, Australia yet. So Phylloxera, for those of you who haven't heard my full lecture on Phylloxera, this tiny little louse that feeds off of the vine itself. And it's native to the United States on the East Coast, actually. And during colonization, it was being brought back and forth to Europe as vines were coming from Europe to the Americas, and they're bringing vines from the Americas to Europe. And they accidentally didn't realize what they were doing, but they brought this louse with them to Europe. And within a matter of 50 years, had wiped out 99.9% of all European grapevines. Wiped them out. I'm talking like had to be ripped up and replanted. That's why you often will not see anything older than about 1870 for vineyard plantings in the or 1900s even throughout Europe. It's because Phylloxera, they couldn't figure out what to do with it. Every time they replanted, it would come back again, because once it gets in the soil, it's in the soil forever. You cannot get rid of it. So Phylloxera wipes it all out, and they figured out the only really way to combat it was to take the roots of American rootstock, vines native to the Americas, think scuppernong, muscadine kind of things, growing in North Carolina and farm grapes. They take the roots of those and they'll graft the vine kind of clippings, the vine shoots, to the top of the roots so that their Cabernet or Grenache or Alianaco or Verdejo is growing from the top of that, but the bottom, the roots, which is what the Phylloxera loves, is too thick. The type of rootstock that they grafted onto is too thick and bitter. The Phylloxera doesn't like it at all. But Phylloxera never made it to Barossa, Australia for some geographic, some climatic, and some soil reasons. Just hasn't made it. And now they're very careful in terms of all the agricultural customs to make sure it doesn't come in there. So these Grenache grapes are actually planted to native rootstock. They were never grafted onto American rootstock. So it just has a different kind of quality to it. And I do think there's something a little bit more like primal or wild to native rootstock vines. That's purely anecdotal. I don't have any science to back that up. There's no explanation here. This is just my experience with the few times I've tasted some own-rooted, so meaning non-grafted wine. Tell me what y'all are getting. And does everyone else see the extreme kind of cloudiness of this wine? But even though it's super cloudy, you can tell how pink it is. I don't know if you can see on the camera, but there's like this pink fuchsia tinge to the wine rather than it being ruby red. There's almost these like bluish undertones, which I often get in Grenache. Could be the pH balance of the wine changes, slight coloring, or it could, the grape itself is just a thinner skinned grape that has a little bit more bluish undertones in it. So let's see. Wow. It must taste like I want to take a bath in it. Like it's very like perfumey, especially for a red wine. Ooh, so vibrant, so juicy. My mouth, if it were asleep, which it wasn't, would be very awake right now. So, all right, let's see what y'all are smelling and tasting. Some Pop says, number 2, old leather motorcycle jacket with last week's plum left in the pocket. I like that. There is something both masculine and fruity about this wine. I like that call. You just put it in a picture better for everybody. And rose, thank you, Akila. That was perfect. There's lots of rose in here. I get some like pencil shavings too, like some freshly sharpened pencils, both the woody part of it and the actual like graphite part of it. Yeah, and the rose that's in there, all these like floral notes, it's like kind of like bruised and browned petals, not quite dried out yet, but kind of brown bruised petals on this. Wow, this is a very interesting nose. Yeah, ain't nothing wrong with that. There's some French oak on this, and so I'm getting a little bit of that cinnamon spice, a little bit of clove, kind of nutmeg, allspice kind of qualities, but it's definitely not over the top. The fruit is supposed to be the shining moment, the shining star of this wine. So softer acidity, right? I mean, after that initial kind of pop, it's a very kind of soft, silkier wine on the palate. So the tannins are not aggressive. The palate is not aggressive. It's a very approachable wine while still being a little bit funky, a little bit like unique and edgy. It is, it's not off-putting. And that's one thing I love so much about Grenache. Grenache grown in any capacity, anywhere, it's one of the most approachable grapes. And so I really like it. I call it my guilty pleasure wine, Grenache or Grenache blends, just because they're so approachable. They don't necessarily beg me to like wax poetic about them for a whole hour, even though I'm kind of waxing poetic about this wine right now. They're so lovely, and I really enjoy them. So Tim Smith, check him out. He doesn't make lots of wine, very small production wine, so you're not going to see his wines in retail shops unless it's like a little small, unique bottle shop. You will find his wines on restaurant lists, though, for sure. I am very happy with this wine. Notice, if you did, screw cap. So all Australian wine, virtually all, I think there's like 2 or 3 exceptions, is sealed with a screw cap. It's kind of like their national mandate almost. It's just a measure to use as few disposable or throwaway goods as possible in the making of the vine. So they're very sustainably conscious, environmentally conscious about how they are using up resources. So cork is not necessarily necessary, if that's not redundant to say. If you are aging your wine, it is important. We're not sure how screw cap wines age yet, partly because it just hasn't been around long enough, and they haven't been using screw caps on premium wine long enough to really see how it changes or doesn't change. What we are understanding about it so far is that because the wine doesn't get any oxygen flow at all, the fruit qualities will stay preserved in the wine longer, while the acids and tannins kind of soften and mellow out. So we have a very different style of aging wine than you do when you're aging it under cork. So quite interesting. Some Pop says the palate has shiitake mushrooms cooked in onion pepper and lemon pepper on it. There is some mushroomy quality on that, and I like that vibrancy of the peppers in there. I'm getting almost like some ginger in there too, like some spice that's not just pepper spice. So food pairing for this one. So I want something smoky off the grill. I kind of want the floral, juicy fruit qualities to kind of balance out something with some char on it. So it could be salmon on the grill, just like, crispy skin, kind of charred on the end. You could do it with smoked pork butt. You could do it with even some like vegetables, Grenache, because it doesn't have these really tannic profile. It's not this really drying sensation in your mouth, is really lovely to pair with vegetables. And it's hard sometimes to find a red wine that doesn't just turn bitter in your mouth with vegetables. So I like, if you're doing a vegetarian night, just stir-fried vegetables with some rice pilaf or something like that. This could be a lovely wine. I like this wine served with a slight chill, not all the way like a white wine, but throw it in the fridge for 20, 25 minutes or so, and it really kind of softens the wine even more. So
you see this, how would you distinguish this from other Grenaches?
So someone asked, how would I distinguish this from other Grenache? So just like we talked about Spain being very extracted, rich, dense style of Grenache, or they call it Garnacha. In Southern Rhone, I think it's more similar to Southern Rhone in that it's this little bit more like masculine style, while softer tannins. But to me, it doesn't have quite the earthiness that Southern Rhone Grenache has. And so I think it's a little bit more vibrant, a little bit more feminine style, even though it does have some of those like kind of masculine components. To me, it's just this vibrant, kind of wild, untamed Grenache. So. All right, well, let us move on to the Alianaco. Very excited to taste this wine. I got to meet this winemaker and tour the vineyards when I was in Italy about 3 years ago. I was just coming back from Italy, and I was wildly excited about all of these wines, and I still am to this day. So what we are going to taste next is Canteen Ledarno. That's their little symbol right here. Is their Alianaco. That's the grape itself from the region of Irpinia, which is in Campania, Italy. So right on the Amalfi Coast area, right where Naples is, or Napoli. Mount Vesuvius is there. And it's a 2016 vintage is what we're drinking. So about 5 years age on that. Much deeper in concentration. You couldn't see through this wine if you had a strobe light, not because it's as unfiltered as cloudy as the last one, but just because the concentration of coloring is so much deeper. Ruby red, slight purplish coloring, but definitely not as magenta-esque or fuchsia-esque as that last one. So Leonardo, I need to show a picture here, and let's see if I can access this easily, but I'll have to give me a second. I'll find that picture I want to show. So Leonardo is in the Terrassi region of Italy. And so in Campania, you have lots of volcanic soils all throughout Campania because of the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. So that is the volcano that is infamous for destroying Pompeii, for totally just covering that entire area with lava. But not just the lava, you also have this volcanic ash throughout the entire area as well, because that those ash plumes spread to the point that it changed the climate of the region for 3 whole years because there was still so much suspended ash. So lava is obviously going to flow out that falls to that's on the ground, but ash is so fine and so lightweight, so it's lacking in that density. So ash can stay suspended in the air for a very, very, very long time, and that's what it did in this area of Campania. So even though it erupted in 79, I think, or 76, that's the year, not 1976, just 76. Someone fact check me on that, if it's 76 or 79. We still are seeing lots and lots of ash in these vineyards. So here is the winemaker with his very, very, very old vines. These are Alianaco vines planted in 1870s. And that's the winemaker himself. He's about 6'2". If that gives you any idea for how tall these vines are, they act like a tree branch almost. And here's why, is because the Italians at that age, these were not people just making wine to export and sell. That's not the point of growing the grapevines. The point of growing the grapevines is so they can make wine, but kind of just for their own personal consumption. So they can't use up their small amount of land with just one crop. So they trellis the branches of the vine up high so that they can plant other crops down below. So it's just about utilization of space. So that's why they trellis them up high like a tree. But then those trunks get thicker and thicker and thicker every year that they grow. So that's why they are like tree trunks almost. But very, very, very old vines, Alianaco. These are also own-rooted vines themselves because Phylloxera doesn't like volcanic soils. There is information saying Phylloxera can't survive in volcanic soils because of the way it needs some sort of moisture, but the ash just like it doesn't retain any moisture. And other people posit that has something to do with the pH balance and extra phosphorus in the soils because of literally that's ash. That's not dirt. That's broken down volcanic ash. For whatever reason, Phylloxera does not like very sandy soils, does not like volcanic soils, and doesn't like Barossa, Australia, or Chile. So few regions in the entire world have vines that still haven't been affected by Phylloxera at all. And this area of Taurasi specifically is one of those areas where these vines are. So he has about 8 hectares, which is about 15-ish or so, 17 acres. So very, 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 very tiny production. And this is his entry tier Alianaco. So that G of the grape is silent. So it's just Alianaco. Some people would even make the L silent as well. So Alianaco. That's kind of a very Italian way to pronounce it. So Alianaco is a little bit more common throughout the rest of the world. And Alianaco is known for being everything to the max. I think I identify with this grape because of that. So acid is very high. Tannins are very high. Fruit, very, very high. Alcohol can be very high. Its ageability, very, very high. Boring level, very, very low. So these wines are very polarizing, right? Because if you don't love your wine at that level, then it can be a little like, whoa, this is his entry tier, aged in the least amount of oak. And these aren't small oak barrels ever that he's using. These are huge, large casks because the idea is that the grape itself is tannic enough. You don't really need the oak to help with the tannins. What the oak does during the fermentation and aging process is help allow for a little bit of oxygen flow to help soften the wine. So sometimes oak is meant to fortify the wine, and that's smaller barrels. The larger barrels are generally meant to help soften the wine during winemaking practices. So I really toyed with this wine. I wanted to feature his wines, but I didn't know if I should do it for this class, for the old vines class. Maybe I should do it for the old favorites class because I have loved their wines for years and years and years, even before I visited them in Italy. Maybe I wanted to do it for their old wine class because his Alianacos, his higher end Alianacos, age for so many years, and they are some of the most breathtaking wines I've ever had in my entire life. Or even the old regions class because they've been making wine there so long. No matter what, I could have served this wine in all of these classes. It could have fit, but I just wanted to drink it sooner, so I had to bring it to y'all now. So tell me what y'all are getting in this wine. Great question. Dominica says, what is the difference between his entry tier and non-entry tier wines? Is it the aging or anything related to the production? Great question. So some of it is the vines he actually uses. So there's one of his, like his premium vineyard, has the oldest vines, which is what the picture came from that I showed you to. 1870, those vines were planted. The other ones are much younger and planted, in 1900 or 1895. So Some of it is the age of the vine. Some of it's the elevation of the vineyard. So throughout the 8 hectares, you have some that are higher up, some that have just better exposure, some that are a little bit lower down. So the vineyard situation, so this all goes down to terroir, right? Why is that vineyard different than another vineyard? And it has so many different factors involved with it. And the actual production. So his Irpenia Alianaco, he's basically using all of the grapes that didn't make it into some of their higher end cuvées. So like his Vineyard, his high wine is coming from the highest elevation vineyard. His Terrassi Reserva is coming from the oldest vines. And so anything that didn't make the cut for those wines that, you know, a bottle costs anywhere from $55 to $155 a bottle, goes into this grape. So it's kind of like his B-class grapes, which are certainly not B-class in my book, but just in comparison to his other grapes. These are the grapes that didn't make the cut for his very expensive bottlings. It's also a little bit less oak aging. So his older wines might age for 3 years in these huge oak barrels. This one, I believe, is at about 12 to 14 months. So yes, baby vines, you know, only 110 years old. Love this. So Sun Pop, number 3 on the nose, maple syrup, blackberry jam, and cinnamon. Interesting, maple syrup. I can see that. There is sometimes for these wines, if they haven't been decanted or like allowed to breathe enough, you just get intense alcohol on the nose sometimes because the wines are so like wound up. As soon as they get open, the alcohol is just like ready to, it's very like volatile, those aromatics. But as soon as it kind of opens up and softens up, I opened this wine, I guess this morning, just to make sure that the wine was delicious. So if you are getting that, I'm not getting that in my wine now, but if you are getting that and kind of struggling to get past that, just do some serious swirling and then just do a puff of air into the glass. So those alcohol molecules that evaporate when you swirl the wine will sometimes kind of get stuck in your glass. You kind of keep going back to it and too much alcohol. So sometimes they need to be forced out. So give the wine a good swirl and then puff into the glass a couple of times. And you should see that the next time you go back in, should be a lot softer, a lot less of that intense alcoholic smell. That should work for any time that you are pouring yourself a glass of wine and kind of get too much of that straight up alcohol off the nose. So a little trick there. Calling this wine yummy, Tony says. Hi, Tony and Jenny. I think this is the first time I've seen you in the chat room, but it's great to see you. Let's see. Akila says, for nose, leather, tobacco, and forest floor. You've got a great palate, Akila. Can't wait to continue tasting with you. That is awesome. And I am loving it. So black cherry, black pepper, and licorice on the nose. Yes, loads of licorice. Great call on that one. Loads of this black licorice along with this vegetable licorice that could be along the lines of, I think, Thai basil or fennel, anything like that, or anise, anything like that you just cut and it's like this vegetable style of licorice. You have that in this wine along with this candied black licorice as well. And yes, loads of black cherry.
Is there such a thing as black currant?
Is there such a thing as black currant? Yeah. So black currants are like plums in that they can range anywhere from like very, very light red color to purple to black. Kind of there's lots of different styles of currants and plums and cherries. They have such a range of things. But you're right in that all of the fruit on this is on that darker side, right? Blackberries, black cherries, black plums, black currants on that darker side. And it's bitter, right? This wine is bitter. It just, it kind of just like that bitterness sits on your tongue. So think perry notes, avoid anything bitter because bitter will always accentuate other bitter things. We know this because we've all had those friends that they're bitter about life. And so if anyone else is complaining, it brings out their bitterness too. So bitter always accentuates bitter, and it needs to be meshed with something on the opposite end of the spectrum. So you would never pair this with like roasted walnut salad or beets or anything like that. You need something different. So whether that is, I think like duck breast with like a cherry gastrique, you need something fruity style. It doesn't have to be something sweet. You just need something fruity and avoid the bitter. I also really enjoy this wine with burgers. Like this is This is, again, not an expensive wine at all, but it totally over-delivers, and it's one of the most interesting wines that I've ever gotten for the price in terms of what it delivers for what it costs. I think it's, what, like $26 or $27 or something like that. So you know, don't be afraid to serve this wine with, you know, a burger, especially if it's got that char on it. I know I've like talked about char multiple times tonight. Maybe I'm just like dying for grill out season, but I could see this being quite nice with the char as well. So, all right. We are gonna unfortunately have to leave Italy, and I'm so sad to leave Italy because these wines are so beautiful, but we're gonna go ahead and go to California to finish off the night in a sexy way with this Zinfandel. This is Limerick Lane. I love the label too. If you haven't actually looked closer in on the label, it is a tree trunk, you know, it's been cut, and I love it. It has an arrow pointing to the outermost ring of the tree trunk saying 2019. I just think that is such a beautiful expression of the history, because it's not the tree trunk, it's the actual, like the trunk of the vine. Sorry, not a tree trunk, the trunk of the vine. You know, it's such a beautiful expression of just the history of these vineyards here. So this is Russian River Valley, only 60 barrels of this produced. And so a barrel is about 225 liters. So that is about 300 bottles or so. So 300 bottles times 60, someone do the math. This is Sonoma County. Russian River Valley is the area that is in the V of Napa and Sonoma as they come down to meet. So it's right on the San Francisco Bay, and is one of the coldest most regions within the whole North Coast. So the North Coast encompasses Sonoma and Napa, and it is the northern part of California. And as the San Francisco Bay comes in, it sucks up the fog rolling through in the afternoon. Everyone's seen those epic pictures of the San Francisco Bay, the Golden Gate Bridge, the fog rolling through, and it's just like this wall of fog that comes through. So what happens is the valleys of Sonoma and Napa, the sun shines on them in the afternoon, kind of heats up that air, it warms, it kind of bakes the valley. No pun intended, because weed is legal there. But well, now it's in Virginia too, so never mind. So it bakes the valley, warm air rises, so that warm air rises, and as it rises, it's going to leave this space for it needs to be replaced. So it acts like a vacuum and sucks up colder air coming from off the air that's off the like hanging out by the ocean. So these cold Alaskan currents are coming down the coast of California, cooling the air right on top of the water. Very, very chilly air there. And that air gets sucked up to replace into the valleys the air that's being, that is rising as that warm air rises in the afternoon. So as that air comes in, it's cooling, it's condensing, it's turning into this fog, and that fog kind of seeps in the afternoon and stays until the next day. So the northern parts of Sonoma and Napa, those parts are going to lose their fog, early in the morning as the sun rises, and slowly further south, you see the fog continue to dissipate. The last area to lose its fog during the afternoon is Russian River Valley, which loses its fog about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So some of these vineyards actually only have really good sunlight during this growing season from about 2 till 5 in the afternoon. So very, very short window to get exposure to the sun, which means that it's a cooler climate than if you go just a few miles north. For instance, if you just want to see how dramatically different this climate is than anything else, so Napa Valley is about 30 miles north to south, and you have an average daily temperature increase of 1 degree every mile you go up in the valley. So it is for 30 degrees difference in terms of the average temperature of Russian River Valley versus the northernmost part of Napa. So coolest climate of all, drastically so because of that fog influence. And so it grows totally different grapes here than it does in the rest of Napa. So typically you're going to see a lot more Chardonnay, Pinot Noir than you will see anywhere else in Napa or Sonoma. There's also a lot of Russian River Valley Zinfandel too, a lot actually. And you have some of the oldest vines too of these Zinfandel vineyards planted in Russian River Valley. And that's because they were planted before Prohibition, before World War I, and they were planted. Honestly, the Italians brought the grape variety in the 1800s, and again, it was made for more like table grapes, just eating grapes, then made into very like just kind of rustic wines. And during Prohibition, when they allowed people to make wine for personal consumption, they kept the Zinfandel grapes because they were almost like, oh, we can't, those are just table grape production. Everyone knows that those are the table grape production vines. So they kept them around for that. It was almost like this incognito thing. They started making a lot of Zinfandel during Prohibition from these vines. So these vines weren't ripped out like a lot of other vines were in California during Prohibition, as people were trying to plant other crops to make money, because they're like, oh no, it's just table grapes, no wine being grown here. And so that's why Zinfandel has lasted a lot longer. These vines are a lot older than old vine anything else that you'll see in California, except for maybe Carignan. Some other weird grapes like Mataro or Mourvedre and Trousseau, oddball grapes. Unfortunately, most of the California wine producers decided in the 50s and 60s that nothing was worth growing if it wasn't Cabernet. So they ripped up a lot of vines and started planting Cabernet instead. And so we see a lot of, that's why Zinfandel is one of the only, kind of surviving older vines of varieties throughout California. It's still prolifically grown. And here's why. Everyone can shit on white Zinfandel, and you can all you want. You don't have to drink it. You can think people who do are terrible humans. I disagree, though, and I thank them, because if it were not for those white Zinfandel drinkers and that white Zinfandel boom that was wildly popular that started in the 60s when everyone was ripping up all these vines and planting Cabernet instead, then Zinfandel would have all been ripped up too. It's because Zinfandel stayed around to make white Zinfandel for all of these white Zinfandel drinkers that we still have these vines in existence today. So next time someone tells you that they like white Zinfandel as a grape and you're tempted to roll your eyes thinking like, oh, you don't really drink real wine, give them a big hug instead. Well, maybe after COVID and make sure you're vaccinated and stuff, but give them a big hug and say, thank you so much. It's because of you that we are drinking very old vine Zinfandel from California. So that's kind of the story of Zinfandel of California and why these vines are so old. Let's get our noses in here. I featured this wine at an event last night too, not the same bottle. And I'm hoping it goes over better for this class than it did my last event. They were not red wine drinkers, and I didn't know this. And so the wine did not go over very well for everybody. But this, wow, it's so pretty. Tell me what you're getting in this wine, please. Number 4 is much more shy on the nose, especially like coming after Alianaco too. It is a little bit more subtle, a little bit more soft, but not on the palate. Yeah, it's definitely not a shy wine on the palate. Not as high intensity as the Alianaco, but definitely not a shy wine for sure. More fruit forward on the nose for me, red berries and maybe blackberries. Yeah, there's less of that bitter quality. This wine has none of those bitter notes that the Alianaco did. Softer acidity too. But can we talk about the alcohol? The alcohol is a little high, right? We're we feel that. We feel that warming sensation going down as we drink this wine. Yeah. So these vines, I believe, were planted Should have brought my notes on this wine specifically. We're still over 70 years for all of these wines. I believe we're about 90 to 100-year-old wines for the Limerick Lane. Not a huge production. Limerick Lane makes very little wine, and it's as we can tell, only 60 barrels of this produced, and they make this and a couple others. But it's really restaurant only, as that you'll see. So if you haven't ever seen Limerick Lane before, that's why. Just smaller production. So Kayla says, warm in the belly, just like my wine. Yes, this is warms you all the way down. So that alcohol is not shy. Glad I don't have to drive anywhere now. Yes, indeed. So we have some French oak on this one as well. So there's no American oak actually throughout this entire tasting. All French oak in here, and hopefully the focus is on the fruit, not oak letting take over. I wanted to see what the fruit of these vines actually demonstrated. But there's one thing that I could truly say about this Zinfandel is it stands in stark contrast to a lot of other Zinfandels, especially Zinfandels from like Lodi or something like that. And because it's such a cooler climate than some of these other regions. So the elegance is elevated. The complexity is kind of elevated. The balance is elevated. Part of that could be because the vine age, remember, because the vine age is going to lead to a little more balance in the actual grapes themselves. But part of that is just the cooler climate as well. So very elegant wine.
Much softer on the palate than others Zinfandels.
Yes, it's not an assault on the palate.
Yeah,
it's soft.
Yeah. You could actually just drink this on its own. Most Zinfandels, I will not say that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Just drink this. I would not do that with the Alianaco.
Yeah, the Alianaco is
a
food wine. And in the wine industry, we always hate this when people say, like, oh, that's a food wine. Because all wine should be food wines, right? But there's definitely, to me, a difference of a wine that I would enjoy just drinking by itself. I just want to pour a glass of that and drink that. Versus a wine like, I really need something, even if it's just a block of cheese. I just need something with this wine. The Alianaco, to me, gets better with just a couple bites of something to eat with it, if it's the right thing. But this Zinfandel is super, super tasty by itself. Let's see, alcohol percentage on this one is 14.8, baby. It ain't shy at all. The Grenache, I'm guessing, was high too, 14%. Because in Barossa, you're getting some sunlight. 14% also for the red wine. So yeah, it's a good thing I'm not doing this class out in public. Otherwise, I'd have to worry about all y'all driving home. 13% on the Verdejo. So of the three reds, was there a surprise in the bunch? Something that you thought like, oh, I love Zinfandel and I don't like this, or I have never heard of Alianaco the grape before, or maybe you've never tried a Grenache quite like this before. Maybe all the Grenache you've had has been like Garnacha from Spain. Do tell what your surprise was on this wine lineup, and is there anything that you're going to? Thank you. Tony says Limerick Lane's vine average 110 years old. So I know I put it on the tags on the back, but I took my tags off before I loaded up my car and forgot to bring them with me. This change of Saturday to Thursday night has left me a little bit unorganized for this class, unlike my other classes when I usually have this information on hand. So thank you. Someone loves the Limerick Lane. Well, great. She's told me now what her Mother's Day present is going to be. I like that. Some pop would say more of Tim Smith Grenache. Okay, awesome. Love it. I'm going back to this Verdejo. It's so lovely. Tony, I know you've been drinking a lot more white wines lately. Is this something that you like? I know you're particular, though, about the white wines. Is this something Jenny likes, too? Is this a white wine both of y'all can get behind? As the wine has warmed up, the white wine that I'm going back to now that has not been chilled this whole time, it is so much more pronounced in that like pineapple note and that minerality, too. So it's quite interesting. So the white is overall favorite of the night for some pop, too. Awesome. And Akila says, I've only had Grenache from South America before, a bit more smoky, but I love this one, too. Yeah, okay, awesome. Yeah, South America could be a little bit atypical in that it all depends on the winemaker if they want to make it the French style or the Australian style or the Spanish style. And so there's a lot of range, but they can be super, super delicious. Dominica says, I was really surprised by the soft tannins on the Grenache. Yeah, that is one thing that's so pleasant about Grenache is that it's softer on the acid, softer on the tannins. So when you just want easy drinking red wine, they can be really, really, really lovely. So this has been a super, super fun class to go through old vines and the science. So if you didn't know, we're doing everything. We're celebrating all things older for this month. It's my birthday month, and I've never been one to like celebrate a birthday month or anything like that. But when I was trying to come up with themes for wine classes, then I was like, well, I just want to, and I was thinking about old vines, and then it kind of came to me, and then it was all, I guess, just marketing. But if there's one thing we've learned in the last year, it's that we should celebrate things when we can. So we're gonna be celebrating all month long, not the birthday necessarily, but just older things. So old wines next week is old favorites. So we're gonna pick 4 wines that I have continuously gone back to, not just since viniculture started, but even since then. And I've continuously just, this wine is just so delicious. The week of the 20th, May 20th, that will be like kind of the birthday celebration because my birthday is on the 21st. So the 20th, we're going to do old wines, and everything's going to be 10 years old minimum. We're going to try a 1955 Cabernet. This is not the right vintage. Sorry, 1995 vintage Cabernet. I would not be able to afford to give everyone a 1955 Cabernet. 1995 Cabernet from California. We are going to try a 2007 Nebbiolo from Italy, a 2011, so a 10-year-old white Burgundy, and a 10-year-old Southern Italian wine as well. So a bunch of just different fun stuff. We're going to talk about the chemistry and science of how wines age once they're in the bottle. Very exciting. That class is not as affordable. It is $190 for the 4-pack, but the wines are truly epic and really amazing to try these wines, but we still can get a little bit of them. And finally, the last class of the older lineup is old regions. We're going to be talking about regions of the world that have been making wines for far longer than us and some of the history of how they helped shape the wine world. Speaking of old regions, last that I'll give you, everyone needs to go look this up on their phone now. There's vines in Georgia that are some of the oldest vines. We don't know how old they are. They estimate that they could actually date back to the 1600s, but because there's no proof or guarantee, it doesn't really fit into the confirmed category. But they're wild vines. They weren't actually planted by any human and cultivated. So they were left to literally, like, these vines grow up cliffs and rocks and stuff like that. And it takes like fields of people hours to pick the grapes because it's in no format. It's not an organized format at all. It's really, truly beautiful to look at some of these old vines. So look up super old wild vines in Georgia, the country, not the state. And that'll be, I don't think I can get any of those wines to feature for the old regions class, but it might be interesting to feature a wine from Georgia. I've tasted some recently that have been super fun. So that is all for tonight. Thank you so much. Yes, go old. I like it. For tuning in tonight on Thursday night. If you're tuning in later and watching this recording at a different time, please text or email me. Let me know what you thought of these wines. I'm very curious. Hope you enjoyed the evening. And if you have any thoughts about classes that you'd like to host in June, would like to host a private event in your home, or just want to tell me what you thought about these wines, please let me know. So until next time, y'all, drink it old, baby. Drink it old. Cheers, y'all.